Thank you. Welcome to the Paine Field Master Plan webinar. We're glad you joined us today. We will give just a few more moments for people to join the event. While we are waiting, we want to remind you that the open house and public comment period for the Paine Field Master Plan is open through April 3rd. You can submit your comments by visiting the website, www.painefieldmasterplan.com. So we're just going to wait just a few moments and then we'll begin. Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're ready to begin now. Welcome again. My name is Terry Ryan. I'm the Snohomish County Aerospace Economic Development Director, and I will be serving as the event facilitator tonight. I'm going to review a few logistics, and then we'll hear from the project team before ending with some time for questions and answers. There are a few things to keep in mind that will make your experience easier using this Zoom webinar platform. And I think we have a slide for that. There we go. If you'd like to see English captions, you can click on the CC button. Participants are automatically muted. Throughout the event, if you have questions for the project team, please type them into the Q&A chat box. There is live Spanish interpretation available during this meeting. This means we'll be presenting a little slower than you might be used to leave time for interpretation. If you wish to participate in Spanish, you can click on the interpretation button on your control panel. And if we could go to the next slide. There we go. If you wish to participate in Spanish, you can click on the interpretation button on your control panel and select Spanish as the language you want to hear. We are recording this webinar to add to our online open house so that those who are not able to join us today will still be able to view this presentation. The recording will be posted on the online open house and will include the presentation only, not the Q&A or public comments. We will begin recording now. And with that, I'll introduce our presenters. Today, we are joined by Michael Turbritti, Vice President of Landerman Brown, and Cody Meyer, Managing Consultant with Landerman Brown. They are part of the team that has been working on updating the Paine Field Master Plan for the last 2 years. They will walk us through the final draft of the master plan and what comes next for the Paine Field Master Plan. And with that, I'll turn the webinar over to our consultants now.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the third in a series of open houses, the first of which was in November of 2021, the second of which was in June of 2022. So here we are in the third in the final series of public open houses. As Terry indicated, there is plenty of opportunity beyond this evening to provide input and comments. We've heard you on the first two. We've spent a fair bit of time going through your comments and documenting all the good observations and input that you have provided so far. So with that, tonight's proceedings will provide some overview of where we are with respect to what we've done, what we have presented in the past in a summary format, and focus more importantly on what we have done since the June 2022 presentation, which fundamentally includes the development phases or the development plan of the project, the capital costs associated with all of those phases. We've got in front of you a draft land use plan. We've also had an opportunity to take a look at the financial viability of a lot of these capital improvements, and we'll briefly provide to you an overview of what happens next. Next. So with that, just to give you a sense of what we have done in the past with respect to our last presentation, is we completed and presented to you the existing conditions of the airport. We discussed with you the FAA approved forecasts. we talked about the facility requirements, and then we spent a fair bit of time talking about how we would substantiate those requirements in facility alternatives. So since that time, as I mentioned, we've developed a phased development plan, the capital improvement plan. We've developed preliminary land use plan, and as I indicated, we've already conducted 2 of the public open house meetings, and we took a look at the environmental issues. So we're not talking about an environmental impact statement or assessment, but the issues associated with those development programs. And we've conducted a financial analysis and review of those plans with respect to ensuring that there's financial viability to undertake those. So that's what we'll talk about tonight. And then subsequent to that, we will go back to, after hearing your comments, and at the close of the open house, we'll await the rest of your comments. And we will then present our findings to our committee meetings, our committee groups, which is our steering committee, and then subsequently with the county executive and county council. And that culminates in our final submission to the FAA for their review. Next. So let's just step back for a minute and just remind ourselves where we are and how we got here. The traffic forecasts are the building block, are the foundation upon which all of the facility requirements are built, and effectively the development program is built. Many of you may recall in 2019, pre-pandemic, the airport within less than a year had processed roughly a total of 1 million passengers, and that's going out and coming in. So we call that total, enplaned and deplaned. We conducted 3 forecast periods. The acronym you will see on the side, we call it a PAL, which is Planning Activity Level. And so we did that for the 1 million passengers, which was the baseline in 2019. And then we had 2 subsequent periods in time, culminating with our forecast of 4.3 million passengers, roughly in our 2040 planning period. So we're talking about a 4 multiplier increase from 2019 to the end of the planning period. We also broke it out in terms of annual operations. So that's the entire complement of aircraft movements combined on the airfield, landing and takeoffs. And so you will see roughly a 35% increase when we approach 4.3 million, or roughly 2040 timeframe. We looked at it in terms of, we sliced and diced this in a fair bit of detail to the passenger operations, which are the scheduled commercial aircraft operations, the general aviation aircraft, and then the forecast-based aircraft. The foundation of the passenger activity is built on the peak hour passengers. And so we forecasted that as well, and peak hour operations, to ensure that we had adequate runway capacity and adequate terminal capacity. So that's just a reminder of where we were in the past. Next. So once we established the demand that we anticipated coming to Paine Field unconstrained, is we took a look at the facilities and said where the facilities will have shortfalls, gaps in that demand. And so we have codified this in a fair bit of detail. As Terry indicated, at this point, a lot of the documentation and detail is provided on the website. So there's a fair bit of detail that you can pull down and review at your leisure. But effectively, what we have observed is that the runway system itself, and I'm primarily referring to the 2 primary runways, have adequate capacity over the planning period to accommodate demand. Now, you will see in our presentation operational improvements to the taxiway systems, but fundamentally the runways have adequate capacity to meet the future demand into 2040, or roughly when we hit 187,000 total operations. However, what we have noted is that in other parts of the airport, specifically the terminal area, terminal precinct, so we're referring there to both the passenger terminal facility, the apron upon which the aircraft park, and the roadway network that serves the terminal, the land side, GA, and a lot of the support facilities will start running into capacity constraints when we approach 1.5 million passengers. So what you're seeing is, in what we call the planning activity level 2, expansion needs to be in place at that moment, plus or minus. Now, there's sometimes you can, what we would call, sweat an asset and provide some operational improvements. But effectively, when we get to roughly 1.5 million passengers, or roughly 155,000 annual operations on the airfield system, facilities or improvements need to be in place. So then the point on the implementation means there's a period of time that requires those improvements to occur in order to meet that necessity of having facilities in place by the planning activity level 2. So there is, in some instances, in short order, a requirement to start implementing and spending capital in order to get ourselves ready for these required improvements by the second planning activity level. Next. It's worth noting as well, now, while the terminal and the terminal area, which is the curb front, elements of the parking facilities, and the parking apron in front on the air side where the aircraft are parked, is in the hands of a private developer, third-party developer, it's important, at least for us, to recognize what additional real estate, if any, would be required to meet the 4.3 million annual passengers. And so what we have said, and we've modified this slightly from the last presentation, is that the existing terminal capacity would be roughly in the range of 1.5 million passengers, plus or minus, if the developer can do some operational improvements and extend the life of that terminal, maybe to upwards of 2 million passengers. That point will need to improve facilities. So it will be a joint effort, potentially, between the developer and the county, accommodating or discussing with the developer possible opportunities of expanding the facilities, or expanding the real estate, rather, upon which the lease sits with the county. So that's just an important point. So let me turn it over here to talk about where we are with respect to the actual facilities now needed in order to meet the shortcomings of the existing facilities, and what's needed over the next 18, 17 years.
Yeah. So can you go back one slide? Okay. So just laying out, and I want to rehash kind of what Michael laid out for us here. So as we get into kind of the preliminary phasing of the master plan projects, essentially development phases, we're going to use the word PAL a lot. Planning activity level is referring to the development phases and the corresponding demand and corresponding projects that need to be in place to serve that demand. So these are planning activity levels rather than sort of points in time or years. So we have 3 major ones, and I'll just kind of walk through the themes, and then we'll get into kind of more detail on what is in each phase or planning activity level. So in the first one, it's really entrance and terminal roads. preparing for a terminal expansion that is going to happen in PAL 1 or PAL 2. We have it right now in PAL 2, obviously dependent on propeller. And then the terminal taxi lane. So really getting the airside part ready to allow the terminal to expand and react to additional demand. PAL 2 is where we have the terminal build out. If and when it comes, we have that kind of happening in PAL 2, which is reflective of that 1.5 million annual passengers that Mike was referring to, and reserving additional areas for general aviation or GA growth here in PAL 2. In PAL 3, really sort of catching up, and this is a large span in times of demand. So this spans from about 1.5 million annual passengers all the way to 4.3. So there's going to be a lot of projects in here. There'll be the airfield improvement projects, mainly safety enhancements and some optimization in terms of capacity enhancements, additional support facilities, and additional parking to accommodate passenger terminal growth. Go ahead. And as we get in here, I want to make it clear, we have these sort of divided into two kind of funding types. So I'm going to walk through the three planning activity levels, or three development plans. Following that, we will have the capital improvement plan, and we'll talk about sort of which projects are capital related, which ones are third party related, and what kind of is the ticket items that we're accounting for. So in the following slides, you're going to see them broken out between capital projects and third party. So capital projects, mainly airfield projects, where the funding source is going to be the county, or it would be the county or the airport requesting FAA funds. And then the third party funded, that would be any third party developers, the GA community, or propeller in terms of the terminal build out and associated parking. Go ahead. Okay, I know the text might be small, so I will walk through all of these. What we're looking at is that first PAL 1 swatch of projects. So this is spanning between 1 map to 1.5. Starting at the top of the screen, we have these labeled as S, G, T, and A, and I'll kind of walk through those. So at the top of the screen, we have the SO1, which is the airport support in terms of administration expansion, which is already sort of in place, and moving a good portion of the administrative staff out of near the terminal area up to SO1. On the front end, we see the GO1, GO2, and GO3. That is sort of the front of house of the terminal. So getting the premier parking, which is there, getting the terminal loop road, building capacity up for those items, and an additional curb to prepare for what may happen if the terminal expands. We also see TO1, which is getting the taxi lanes, so the air side, ready behind the terminal to allow freedom of movement through dual taxi lanes and a pushback dedication. And then we see AO1 and AO2, so those are the airside projects here for PAL 1. AO1, which is a project that the airport has worked on to improve an existing FAA hotspot. So that project is going to be implemented soon. In terms of AO2, that's a remote pad that through conversations with the airport and the technical committee, that's really providing an additional parking spot for a larger aircraft, talking a group 5 or a group 4, in the event that a special event comes in or a larger aircraft comes in and we need somewhere to park it, right? So that's sort of a flexible pad that can handle a larger aircraft in the instance that one comes to the airport. And something I should have mentioned at the beginning, in the top right, we have the capital projects. which will likely be Snohomish County funded or FAA funded with it, or the black with the white text. And then the third party funded will be the white block with the black text. Okay, moving to the next phase. I'll start on airfield on this one. This is where we kind of see our first move on sort of cleaning up either some safety conditions or improving capacity or optimizing exits in terms of aircraft getting off the runway as quick as possible. Those are the AO3 and AO4. So those are two high-speed exits. Moving in the terminal area, this is where we have the terminal expansion. TO2 and TO3, it's broken into two projects. I don't know if it'll happen all at once. In terms of demand, they can happen separately in terms of our demand that is tied to the forecast. How they develop and the timing of they develop, that will be up to that third-party propeller. TO4 is also the large ramp expansion that would be associated with this. Just as a reminder, we have 3 gates today, 2 of those which are contact. The master plan projects that total of 3 to go to 7. So a total of 7 contact gates with additional inactive positions for remain overnights. SO3 is the development of a consolidated de-icing pad. Right now, the de-icing operations happen at the gate. In order to sort of maximize operations and efficiency, that probably should happen somewhere else in a consolidated manner, and that's what we have at SO3 there. Additional support facilities we have is in terms of SO2. That's an expansion of GSE equipment and maintenance staging area. SO4, there's a couple there. That would be land reservations for general aviation if they expand. So those are 2 areas identified there. Okay. Talking about the third phase. So this, as a reminder, this spans from 1.5 million annual passengers to 4.3. So this is a big jump, and it would likely be over a number of years. So I want to highlight just a couple projects here. Starting on the air side, down at the west runway, the commercial runway, the instrument runway, let's say, AO7, AO9, AO8, A11, AO5. A majority of those are safety enhancements in terms of bringing the airfield up to standard, and also taking advantage of some runway exits that, in terms of siting them in the right place and optimizing capacity for the instrument runway. Another airfield project, AO6, that's the decommissioned runway, the 1129. Right now, Boeing has a lease on that property. The master plan is not here to change that. So we are reserving that as sort of a flexible airside piece in support of operations and potentially lease capabilities as needed for aircraft. In terms of ground transportation, those are the G ones that we see. The roadway network coming into the terminal, which is 100th and Airport Road. PAL 3 is where we would see some additional capacity be needed. So that would be additional lanes at the intersection and additional lanes coming in along 100th, connecting into the main terminal loop. GO7, GO5, and GO9 is additional ground transportation improvements. GO9 is existing lot would be converted to additional capacity for rideshare companies. GO7 and GO7 would be a reservation for a parking structure. So as demand increases in the passenger terminal, We don't know if it is going to happen or not. If there is a desire to maintain the level of service, which we all love at Paine Field today, it would likely have a parking structure near or adjacent to the terminal. So we've reserved a spot for one at this point. We have additional GA, those are the SO6s, so additional growth development areas in 2 or 3 different areas for GA expansion. And then additional areas in SO5 and SO8 for growth in terms of reserving an area for flight catering as the airport grows. That is a typical function that would need to be on airport and co-located to the terminal, and SO8 in terms of additional growth for GSE equipment.
Okay, can we go back to the previous slide, number 3? Just before I get into the capital improvement plan, it's worth noting as a point of emphasis here, and I wanted to mention this from the outset, is that the vast majority of the moves or the capital improvement plan does not affect the actual runways themselves. There is no lengthening of the runways. There's no additional runways. What you have heard is improvements in terms of taxiway access on and off the runways. So there is no change essentially in how, currently anyway, how air traffic control routes aircraft in and out. That being said, there's obviously going to be a potential increase in demand. The other thing that's important to note as well is that most of what you have seen here, and when we talk about the capital investment improvement program, we don't include anything related to the terminal because that is within Propeller's purview. So what you're seeing here is really an indicative plan. It is not Propeller's plan. The idea here is to understand in the future, if the county so chose to allow additional scheduled commercial traffic, what might that look like in terms of a terminal facility, in terms of its footprint and potential layout on the apron where the aircraft are parked. So this is not intended to be a design, nor is it something that Propeller has done. It's an exercise that we have performed to fully understand what the extent of property might be needed in order to accommodate that future aircraft, scheduled commercial aircraft demand in the future. So those are points of emphasis that I wanted to make. The other point as well is that the crosswind runway has been decommissioned. And so it will remain decommissioned. It is not needed for the purposes of capacity. It has a current use. Many of you know that it is parking positions for the 777s of Boeing. It has the ability to act as additional commercial real estate. We've maintained the integrity of a taxiway to move between the 2 runways, but effectively it will remain decommissioned in the future as a point of emphasis. So next slide. So a number of these plans, a number of these projects that you're seeing again is fundamentally to do 3 things. It's to accommodate demand. It's operational and safety improvements, which are taxiway to get the aircraft off the runways quicker and more efficiently. But we've also included what's called major maintenance and equipment capital as well. So we've developed a program that is phased on a year-by-year basis. And at the end of the day, while the costs, the costs of these have to be affordable, we've done this in a manner that will balance the proceeds of the county with potential funding by the federal government as well. And I'll get into that in a second. The total capital program, and you'll see the breakdown On the next slide is approximately 313 million in today's dollars. We've included some elements of the terminal parking apron as a cost. We're not entirely sure the county's mindset in terms of whether that should be a cost to the developer or if that is a county cost and how that might be reimbursed. The other point that's important is within these costs, we've included what we call soft costs, A&E, contingency taxes, and any potential environmental remediation associated with those as well. What you'll see on the next slide is the vast majority of these costs are effectively for the airfield, either taxiway improvements or runway rehabilitation, and that's the single biggest cost. As I mentioned, the largest single project is airfield rehabilitation. So it's roughly 178 million of the total 313. And then the next component of that is what I'm referring to as the terminal area, the apron area, and the roadways around that, and then elements of ground transportation, and then pavement management, which is major maintenance, and then associated equipment capital required to maintain the airport over the next 20 years. I'll conclude this component as well, which is the vast majority of that 313 million has eligibility by federal sources. So roughly 82% of the total of those costs. The vast majority of these capital costs are eligible for FAA funding, AIP, and which Airport Improvement Program, and passenger facility related funds. So approximately 82% of that total is eligible for federal funds, and then roughly 10% would be borne by the county as needed. So it's important to note that. So let me turn to another important subject, which is noise and our analysis around noise associated with the forecasts. So next slide.
Mike, let me talk about land use first.
Sure.
So another important step here in what is going to help strategically reserve the 1,252 acres of the airport is sort of a guiding tool on growth sort of patterns and what can be accommodated if future developers come in, right? So specifically talking about the draft land use plan, and that's what we're looking at here. We have it broken out into 4 areas, and this is consistent with what was done in the last master plan. I'll walk through the 4 colors here. So this is more or less reflective of the master plan projects that we walk through, but also reserving in terms of a land reservation for what the land uses for all the acres could and should be. So starting with yellow is really the runway and taxiway areas. So that is your 2 runway system. That is all the airfield that handles most of the aircraft movements and on your day-to-day, which would include both runways, main taxi lane, Echo, the taxi lanes behind the terminal expansion, the Bravo ramp. So that is airside only. Next is the blue. So that's specifically talking about aviation use. So that's reserving areas that primarily have adjacency to the airfield or require access to the airfield for business. So that's that light blue section. And the purple is land reservation for general aviation. So that's what is existing today and the additional areas that are reserved in the future. And the last is the green. So that is the additional area that's not already captured by those first 3. So that's airport compatible development in terms of commercial or industrial. So that is kind of all the additional pockets, whether that's an existing business or additional areas along the west side or the Beaumont campus. So filling in additional areas that can accommodate some commercial or industrial growth into the area. Okay, next I wanted to touch on the noise analysis that was prepared as part of the master plan in terms of evaluating noise exposure to adjacent land uses and communities. I want to kind of draw the attention to the two maps, and I'll kind of talk through them. The 2019 and what we're looking at here, that blue line represents the 2019 baseline for the master plan noise exposure contour, and it's reflective of it's called the 65 DNL, and it's really the planning line that FAA uses that they refer to as significant impact. So for planning measures in terms of the land use and adjacent land use compatibilities, that's kind of the guiding level. DNL standing for day-night levels. Next to that, you'll see the dashed purple, which is representative of the last master plan's future contour. So you can see since 2003, when that was done with a 5-year outlook, which was 2008, some additional noise in terms of potential noise exposures. You see them kind of in the different ground run-up areas. You see them along the approach and departure center lines of those runways, mainly focused really on those corridors where the approach and departures happen. Next is the 2041. So the light blue line stays constant here. So that's the 2019. As demand grows and as we grow to that 4.3 and operations grow, along those approach center lines and departure center lines, that's where we see kind of those peaks kind of extend, right? So we evaluated those, and in terms of impacts to potential land uses, no residential or no noise sensitive land uses are within those boundaries. So what does it all mean? So these noise contours will be updated with the county's official plan and help guide some adjacent land use planning as the master plan concludes.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of time subsequent to my closing with respect to comments. So there is an opportunity here for you to both verbalize through the chat in the webinar. We may not get to all of your questions on the webinar, but we will answer all of those questions during, and you'll have the opportunity to put questions in the open house. But we will address all of these questions at the conclusion of the open house. It becomes part of the record. So we do seek your input. We're receiving those questions and we're documenting them and providing responses to all of those questions. So that's the next step of this. After this public open house meeting, we will, circle back with our steering committee and get their thoughts as well, additional thoughts on this. We will then submit this, not necessarily in this order, but for FAA review. They're reviewing a number of our draft documents as well. There's a state EPA review that is part of this continuum as well. And then subsequent to that, your inputs, our update to the written report, it will go for review and comment to the county executive and then the county council. And then we will go back to the FAA and seek their final review approval and sign off. That's likely going to occur somewhere between now and Q3 of 2023. So we may not get to all of your webinar questions, but we will address them all at some point. So with that, thank you very much. And I will turn it back to Terry.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike and Cody. Appreciate the presentation by both of you. The presenters will stay in the meeting to answer additional questions until 7 o'clock. But before we jump into the Q&A, we're going to have a quick pause so that our interpreter can translate any in-language questions. As a reminder, you're welcome to type a question into the Q&A feature box at any time. If you're joining us by phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. So we have a little bit more time than we thought. So we've got about 17 minutes here. So again, Mike already said this, but I want to say it again. Any questions that are in the Q&A that have not been answered tonight will be captured and answered in the final document. And that will be up on our website in approximately 30 days. Okay, so let's just go right to the questions. Mike, do you want me to take these out of the Q&A?
Feel free to run them sequentially if you'd like.
Sure. And Mike, do you want to just do that? Do you want me to read the question? What's the most efficient way of doing this?
It probably makes sense for the benefit of all to read it aloud and then address it as best we can. If we can't, we commit to responding to you in writing.
Okay. And Kristen is going to answer some of these by writing. So I'll ask the ones that are live. Okay. Here's one. From kindergarten to senior high, there are children surrounding all 4 flights in our neighborhoods. Does the Paine Field Master Plan address noise pollution that can harm the children learning?
So I don't know if that question was asked prior to Cody's presentation of
it was, Mike.
Okay. So I guess the best way of answering that is to show the noise contours. And I mean, if it's of benefit, we can explain how we've done these noise contours and, try to make sure that they're as accurate as possible and have the questionnaire that's being asked answer it in the context of what we just presented. I know that may sound evasive, but I'm not entirely sure how to answer that directly.
Okay, and I know Kristen is going as fast as she can through these, so please bear with us. Mike, I'm just going to read these as they're asked. Can this not be looked at only as a financial decision? What about our communities, kids, wildlife, climate change?
Okay, well, that is a lot of good commentary there. So, as I tried to mention, the foundation of this plan is, future demand. And so we're addressing the requirements based on the demand, and then we assign and identify costs associated with those capital projects. So, the financial analysis is but a piece in that. It certainly doesn't frame everything, but we need to understand what the nature of the projects are, what the cost of the projects are, and how those will be paid. Again, I'm not sure if that was asked prior to my slide indicating that 82% of these projects were eligible for federal funding. But I mean, it's a continuum in a process here, and it's not meant to be singularly focused on, the financial implications of this. We get there through a process, I guess, is the best way of saying that.
Great. Mike, let's see, here's one. It says, bear with me. According to the noise contour maps, no neighborhoods are affected by the increased flights and noise. I live approximately 1 mile from Paine Field. I promise you that we are woken at night by flights. We have to pause conversations, TV shows, and sometimes our house shakes. I report the loudest planes. The last report was alt point 37 and 800 feet over my house. It is a disservice to ignore the residents affected by the expansion of the airport. I guess that's a statement, not a question. Bear with me just a second. Oh, how many are attending the webinar, and how does this attendance compare with the previous webinars? So I think I saw the count earlier was about 130 people. That's gone down. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's gone down to 121. I'm not sure. Kristen or Mike, do you know, or Whitney, do you know how that would fare to the previous ones?
It's about on par with the other 3 webinars that we've held throughout this process. We've had about 120 to 140 attend each one of these.
Okay, great. Does the plan include how to reduce emissions such as GHG of ground services or parking traffic, et cetera? Not an airplane related question.
So in our analysis on the noise, we're simply at this point identifying the impacts of noise and the contours associated with the annual accumulation of noise of all of those aircraft. So we haven't gotten into that level of detail with this master plan, which is effectively more of a strategic plan than necessarily a tactical one at this stage. You know, and it's worth noting that, because a lot of the projects that come out of this, depending on the nature of the project, will go into a lot more detail. What we have done is provide a roadmap, a guideline, if you will, of the nature of the projects that are needed to match demand along the road to get to 4.3 million roughly to 2040. And so the nature of those specific projects will involve, some more than others, environmental reviews and impacts that will go through a process. And so some of those may get into that level of detail at the project specific level, as opposed to at this level, which is more of a strategic approach.
Okay, I've been asked to go back, scroll back up and look through the questions. There's some earlier questions I didn't read because it says here that Kristen Banfield would like to answer this question. Kristen, are you going to write an answer to those questions?
Terry, I would love for you to answer those questions live.
Oh, even if it says Kristen Banfield would like to answer this question?
Yeah, that means that you need to read it.
My apologies, everyone.
So Terry, I did want to add something on the last response as you
Go ahead.
kind of queue up the questions here. It's worth noting again that to Mike's point, this is really projecting demand and providing projects to serve that demand and providing capacity. When we talk about noise pollution or noise impacts or social justice or children's in schools, all of that is going to be associated with additional environmental processes or studies that are going to happen after the master plan. Within the master plan, we don't have an EA or NEPA. We are simply providing a roadmap, and as these advance, right, that there will be required, right, a more detailed environmental look at a project-based scale.
Cody, at a higher level, for the benefit of the audience, either you or Chris might do a little short explanation of the critical sort of contours. We talk about the 65 DNL, what that actually means, why that's important, and what what actions are actually taken. It might be beneficial to the group.
Yeah, Chris, do you mind adding a little more context there?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so the DNL, or average, the day-night average sound level metric, is the noise metric that's required for use in federal noise and environmental studies. And it's based on the average noise level of an average annual day. So we look at all the operations on within a 1 year period and divide by 365 to get what would occur on an average annual day. And then using the FAA approved noise computer software noise model, input that data into the computer model to generate the noise levels for that average annual day condition. And basically 65 DNL is the current threshold of what the federal government considers a significant impact to noise sensitive land uses, including residences, schools, and other land uses that are considered noise sensitive. And so the average noise level, if you consider over an average day, you have peak times when aircraft are flying overhead, and then you have the valleys when there's no aircraft activity. And the calculation basically takes the average of that of all those levels, with an additional nighttime penalty of 10 decibels for aircraft events that occur between 10 p.m. and 6:59 a.m. to add extra weight to aircraft at night when people are home or sleeping or otherwise expecting less noise. So that is the required metric that's required to be used for studies such as this. And so the noise contours that Cody showed earlier reflect that metric and that methodology.
It's important to note that it's the foundation to create a policy on ensuring that the community doesn't build new residential development inside an environment that's going to be potentially worse for its residents. Having said that, that doesn't dismiss the fact that you're going to get single event aircraft coming in and disturbing people that are outside these contours as they're having an event in their backyard. That's likely happening before anything that we're doing. I wanted to make it clear that the runways aren't changing at all in any manner. In fact, the idea is to remove aircraft as quickly as possible. Having said that, there is an increase in demand as well. If you look closely at the contours, there's not a material change since the last 20 some odd years. The aircraft are a lot quieter, but again, that's not to dismiss the fact that a single event aircraft can't be heard and may be irritating. I recognize that. The idea here is to impart to the county an ability to develop policy that doesn't exacerbate noise and develop residential inside this 65 DNL zone, or put residential inside what might be otherwise zoned for commercial, if that makes sense.
Mike, we've just got a couple more minutes. I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more questions. Is that all right? Absolutely. Great. This is somebody who had asked this question apparently in the last webinar. It was regarding how the FAA and Paine Field were going to cooperate with hobbyists in the area who like to fly low-flying radio-controlled aircraft. Right now, you automatically get a rejection of requests, even though you might be asking for clearance of a small helicopter that would be flown much lower than the surrounding trees. What can be done to work together?
I think that's probably an FAA or ATC issue. I would defer to that as opposed to this forum.
Okay, so we'll capture that and get that answer up on the website within 30 days or approximately 30 days. I don't understand. Oh, well, hold on just a second. Going as fast as I can here. Sorry, it keeps scrolling me all the way down to the bottom, and that's, bear with me just a second. Oh, we'd like to know what jobs would be created because of the airport, and are they really good paying jobs? How many are family wage jobs?
So that's an excellent question. As demand increases, I mean, one of the additional components of analysis that really should be done is the economic impacts of the airport growing. I mean, you can anticipate, inside the fence, and I'm not including Boeing because I can't speak to their policy of growth, but with respect to inside the lease line, as air traffic grows, you're going to get additional schedule commercial aircraft jobs, direct, indirect jobs, and you're same with elements of airport MROs, all the support related services. It's an important question, and I think that analysis should be done. So.
Great. Also, let's see, one more quick question, then I'm going to wrap this up. And again, all your questions will be answered and they'll be on put on the website in approximately 30 days. Sorry, it scrolled down to the end again. Bear with me. It keeps scrolling down to the end. We will get all these questions answered. And it seems like that's all the time we have for questions right now. Before we close, I want to take a minute to thank our steering committee, stakeholder advisory committee, and the technical committees, as well as our airport commission for their involvement in this 2-year plus process. In addition, we want to thank all the community who have taken the time to engage with us throughout the master plan process. To learn more about the master plan, be sure to visit our website, painefieldmasterplan.com. If later tonight or in the next 2 weeks, you have a comment you would like to share with the team, make sure you visit the online open house. The comment section on the open house will be open through April 3rd. And at the end of this webinar, a window will automatically open with a survey. We are asking all attendees to please fill it out. It's an anonymous survey and will only take 6 to 8 minutes. The demographic information will help give us a picture of the population makeup and help us make informed decisions. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you again for joining us.